Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We're honored to have with us Amy Demboski. She is a mayoral candidate for the mayor of Anchorage, the municipality of Anchorage. We've invited calls. We already have one caller lined up to talk to Amy. But first, Amy, I want to welcome you to the show. Thank you for being with us and being willing to take calls and talk about what's going on in Anchorage.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's just first kind of talk a little bit about the state of the race, and then we'll take Maria's call. Where are you at? I mean, you've got, three other top contenders, right?
Yep. So there's about 4 top contenders, including myself. So you'd have Berkowitz, Halcrow, and Coffey that typically make the top 4, slots. I personally think I'm the only conservative in the race. I don't view the other 3 as being right of center.
Well, I tend to agree with you. In fact, I've endorsed you in the race. I think you are the only solid conservative in the Senate. I can't say I really know all of them personally, but I certainly know their politics. Ethan, a socialist, I think maybe that's too strong of a word, but certainly a liberal. Andrew Halcrow, I mean, worse than a liberal. He's a Republican who calls himself a conservative when he really isn't. I mean, he's just straight up lying about where he's at politically. And then you got Dan Coffey that's confronted with a whole bunch of issues. And we're going to talk about each of those 3 as well, what you're doing in the race. But let's first take that call from Maria. She's been patiently waiting for us. Maria, welcome to the Joe Miller Show. Thank you for your call.
Oh, hi, Joe. I'm a huge supporter of yours. I'll tell you what happened, then I'll get off the air.
Sure, go ahead.
First, after you were thrown out of the race, when I went and registered as a 0, I changed my party totally, And
right.
Then I go to vote for the last mayoral race, and I went to early vote at the library. The League of Women Voters has Excel sheets, and they have about 25 names for each sheet. And they want your name and printed, signature, and your birth date. And I told them the last time, I said, this isn't helping with identity theft. So I turned it into the mayor's office. Nothing happened. I called another talk show. Nothing happened. So 4 years later, or whatever it is, 3, I went to vote, and I really was. I was the only one I could think of voting for was your guest today. It's the same thing. And the old woman there got in an argument with me. I was trying to talk to the nice representative, but the alpha one was saying, I'm going to watch you sign that. You're not going to see anybody's birth date or name. And I said, well, you see the button on my blouse here? I said, that has a camera in it. And she said, you're not going to vote? And I said, no, not under these conditions. So I'll take it off the air, but, it really thwarts liberty and privacy. But I'm, to your guest, I'm really going to try and get out and vote on that day. Thank you very much, Joe.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, for the call, and thank you also for your past support. I appreciate that. One of the things that, Amy, that has been of concern to me, and of course it's been an issue even in the municipal elections, is this issue of, whether or not we have propriety in voting. And back in the 2010 race especially, major issues, of course, one of the reasons why we were able to find out all of the issues about the integrity issues with voting is for the first time we had this massive write-in campaign. And so we had all these ballots that we were able to evaluate. We were able to see that ballots have been accessed prior to the vote. They've been filled out prior to the vote. And dozens of people filed affidavits with the Alaska court system regarding the frauds that occurred. And it reflected, whether or not, and this had nothing to do with the ultimate end of the race, but it had to do with the fact that people were losing confidence in the vote. And one of the things that we've seen, I'm originally from Fairbanks, been there for a number of years, we've actually seen an increased, shall we say, passivity. People no longer want to vote. They don't want to get engaged in the system because they don't think their vote counts. Now, you've been on the assembly, and of course, you've seen what's happened in the municipal elections before. Should people approach the voting system with an askance eye like Maria, or do you think things are pretty sound in Anchorage?
Well, I think Anchorage has fewer problems than the state does. I think the state has bigger issues, but at the same time, I take voter fraud very seriously. And I think that's the one thing we have to ensure is pristine. We have to make sure that the right people are voting. Now, when it comes to dealing with the integrity of our municipal elections, that falls on the responsibility of the Assembly. We have an Ethics and Election Committee, and that is the Assembly's job. And so if there are things that are not going right, we need to know about it because we need to correct it. Because the one thing is every single person's vote should count, and we should make sure it's only counted once.
Well, and not only that, you don't want that vote then zeroed out by somebody that doesn't have the right to vote. I mean, Anchorage had for how many decades an illegal alien that was serving as an Anchorage police officer?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that's why I say it is imperative that we find whatever deficits there are in the system, we identify them and we correct them immediately.
Well, I appreciate your willingness to do that. And I can tell you, I think it's important to basically to voters to ensure that, this is a sacrosanct part of the democratic process, right?
Yeah.
If the vote doesn't count or if somebody cancels out your vote, then it leads to apathy. And we've already seen that. It's growing. It's something that's got to be addressed, especially in this state in the wake of what's happened. So I appreciate your commitment to that. Now, there's another area that I think really, and that's a high contrast point, I think, between you and the other candidates on vote integrity. I've never heard any of them say anything like that. Of course, I challenge them to come on my show. They can talk about it, and Hal Crow can explain as to why he was part of the problem back in 2010 with all those issues. But another area that is a high contrast point that has really attracted me to your candidacy is the Prop 5 stance that you've taken, and it's unequivocal, right? I mean, you want to make sure that people, Christian businessmen and women, and even non-Christians that simply want to have the right to serve who they want to serve. It's an option that you want to preserve. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I've made it very clear. I don't think people should be discriminated against, but that includes people of faith. I mean, in Anchorage in 2012, by 58% of the vote, the voters of Anchorage voted down what was Proposition 5 at the time. And I've made it very, very clear that I believe in religious freedom, and I will not support another Prop 5 type of ordinance.
So where are your opponents on that? Berkowitz, Halcrow, and Coffey. Have they made a stand on that issue?
Well, I think I'm the only one that's made a definitive stand. I know that's not true. Halcrow and Berkowitz both support Prop 5. I vocally oppose it, and I have not heard Dan Coffey take a position on that.
Yeah, I think Halcrow's a pretty advocate gay marriage. I mean, again, I struggle for any point that Halcrow supports that would allow him to qualify as conservative or even Republican. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not sure why the guy masquerades with that label, because it really is pretty disingenuous.
Well, the fact of the matter is, I think, I'm pro-life. I value traditional marriage. I'm Christian. I don't support a statewide income tax. I didn't support raiding the permanent fund. I mean, we have a lot of differences. Do I think we both care about our community? I do. But is my focus different? It is. He has been focusing for the last couple of years on social issues that tend to be the opposite of the positions that I take. And I think it's one of those defining factors. It's not just on social issues; it's on fiscal policy. I'm not looking to get into taxpayers' pockets and take more money from wherever I can. I'm looking at making sure we're running the government as efficiently as possible. And anytime I have the opportunity to give taxpayers money back, I will do that.
Well, and in fact, you've got a record that stands behind that, too. I mean, my understanding is you've served on the assembly. You've taken some stands that actually the mayor has been opposed to. Wasn't there a tennis court subsidy thing that came up that you took a stand on? What's the story with that?
Well, essentially, Mayor Sullivan wanted to build a $10 to $12 million tennis court facility in West Anchorage, and I looked around and I realized, honestly, if the roof of the Sullivan Arena is leaking, we probably shouldn't be building anything new. And so I opposed it, and in fact, I was able to successfully work with the legislature and get that money reappropriated to road and drainage projects in the municipality, because I believe one of the core functions of government is building and maintaining infrastructure. And that doesn't mean multi-million-dollar tennis courts. It means the basics. It means, fixing potholes and paving roads and those types of things. So, yes, I have been, opposed by Republicans and Democrats when I take positions that are, in my view, responsible government positions. And it is. You don't have to be everything to everybody, but the core essentials that we need to do, public safety, infrastructure, and making sure there's educational opportunities for kids, those are the things we have to do. We have to have sound fiscal policy. Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, so I've always stood up for the taxpayers, and I don't apologize for it. I think that's what we're supposed to do as public servants, is we're supposed to protect people's private rights, but at the same time have the opportunity to make sure that the basics get done, which, and we spend people's money well when we have to spend it.
Well, and in fact, that focus is going to have to even be more pronounced as time moves along, especially given the fiscal environment we're in with the cutbacks on government services at the state level. It's going to be an increased dependency, of course, on what the municipalities can provide. So it's going to require a fiscal hawk in the office of the mayorship in Anchorage to really make things run smoothly, given where we're headed in the state. Amy, I'd like to keep you on again, talk a little bit about some of the exciting endorsements that you've received. There's a very impressive list that I've had an opportunity to take a look at, and I'll give you an opportunity to talk about that. Also, if there are any undecided voters out there, or decided voters for that matter, who want to talk to the mayoral candidate, Amy Demboski, please call us 569-1080. Stay with us. The Joe Miller Show, back with you in a few. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We have Amy Demboski on. She is a mayoral candidate for Anchorage. Election coming up next week. Largest Alaskan city. Lots up. You know, if she doesn't carry, what is it, I think 45%, they have to be a runoff. We hope that she carries more than that so that we don't have to have yet another show with Amy, not because we don't like her, but because we want her to get busy doing the right thing as soon as we can have her. Amy, thanks for staying with us.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm ready to get to work for the people of Anchorage, so I would rather do one and done.
And I bet the forums, they've got to be exhausting. How many have you done so far?
Oh, I think we've done 13 or 14 now, so we've done quite a few.
Sounds like a U.S. Senate campaign. So you've got, let's see, KTU still coming up, right?
Yeah, KTU is tomorrow night at 7. And then
that's going to be broadcast live,
yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
7 to 9, I believe. And it'll be filmed at the Wendy Williamson, I believe.
And then you've got KTVA after that.
Yeah, KTVA is the day before the election, so it's on the 6th. And I think it's later in the evening.
So, you know, during the Senate campaign, KTVA, of course, that's the station that, I don't know whether you recall this or not, but they butt dialed my press secretary, and they were caught conspiring, trying to plant stories about the candidate they didn't like, who happened to be me. And so we went ahead and, of course, did the forum with them in this last election, but concerned about some of the formatting and issues of the like. Who is actually moderating KTVA this time for you?
Oh, well, this time it's going to be Mark Begich, and it's going to be Rick Mystrom.
Now, aren't they supporting other candidates in the race?
They are. Both of them have been supporters of other candidates in the race, and so that could be challenging, but nonetheless, I can take on either one of them, so I'm fine.
Yeah, well, I'm kudos to you for staying with it. And if I were advising you, I'd say absolutely participate in the debate. But I mean, so much for media fairness. I mean, just, this is a talk show. I can be as opinionated as I want. I'm not out there saying that, hey, this is a fair and balanced presentation. I'm going to tell you what I think, and I support Amy. But, as far as these organizations out there that are trying to be purveyors of the truth, trying to give us an unvarnished view of things, it blows me away at the efforts that they undertake sometimes to show things in a different light. And I certainly hope that you're able to show them that you're the best candidate. I know that your principles, your values that I've heard you express are solid, and they really do truly differentiate you from the other candidates. And on that note, let me just inquire with you a little bit on the tax issue. Of course, that's going to be a major, major issue coming up with, of course, the state losing funding, more reliance perhaps on local services, given the fact that the state's not going to be able to carry its weight. How does your past match up to, say, a Berkowitz or a Halcrow with respect to expenditures and fiscal conservatism?
Well, what it comes down to is I truly don't think we have in Anchorage a revenue problem. We have a spending and prioritization problem. When you look at me compared to Halcrow or Berkowitz, they immediately go to taxation. Just today, Halcrow was talking about potentially a new tax on the horizon. So, in the past, they've both supported an income tax. They've both supported rating the PFD to go into the permanent fund and use half as distribution for education spending. So, we do have a different perspective. My background happens to be in business development and management, and it's in the healthcare sector. But I do also have an MBA in finance. So when I'm looking at municipal resources, the first thing I'm going to do is ensure that we're actually spending the people's money well. And I'm not going to just immediately say we need more revenue, because I don't think we do. We just essentially spent $40 million on a failed software implementation program, and they're starting over and expanding the scope. I mean, it's insane. And so we have to look at it and say, if we're not doing everything right first, why in the world would you go to the taxpayers and ask them for more money? I don't think you should. But I also start looking at the municipal assets, and, I look at the Port of Anchorage. I don't believe for 1 second that the state is going to give us $300 million to fix the Port of Anchorage. So we have to start being more self-reliant. We have to look at the port and understand that that's a revenue-generating asset. We could absolutely do a revenue bond, so the revenues from the port could pay for the upkeep and the maintenance of the port. We could do a public-private partnership. So I think the way I look at things is definitely different from some of the others, but I think it's that real-world practical experience and the ability to recognize we don't have to do things the way we've always done it. And the way we've always done it is either general obligation bonds or just go to the state with our hand out. It's time we really turn and become more self-reliant.
Well, it's obvious that people are growing in confidence about your candidacy. I've seen that a number of endorsements have come out. Of course, some are related to your conservative cred, certainly taking a stand on a number of issues, including Prop 5, unabashed on that issue. We'll talk more about that here in a little bit. But from what I can see, I mean, you've wrapped up, I don't know, how many different endorsements? I mean, you've got Alaska Family Council, right? Recently, Alaska Right to Life. Tell us about some of your other endorsements that you've gotten recently.
Well, obviously, I'm very happy to have your endorsement. And former Lieutenant Governor Meade Treadwell has also endorsed me, the Municipal Taxpayers League, South Anchorage Assembly Member Bill Evans, Senator Kathy Giesel, Senator Bill Stoltz, the Veterans Party of Alaska, the Tea Party. So I have a lot of different voices that have solidified behind my campaign because they recognize I'm the real deal. I am a conservative. I've been a Republican for more than a month, and I act like a Republican. I stand on limited government, free market principles. I believe in conservative values. And just for the purposes or the benefits of our listenership, how long have you been a Republican? 20 years. Okay. I'm 38, and when I was 18, I registered as a Republican. All right. Didn't mean to date you on that, but is there somebody in the race that's only been a Republican for a month? Well, I would say January 30th of this month, Mr. Coffey became a Republican, which, I was happy to welcome him to the party. And what's up with that? I mean, did he just think nobody was going to notice the registration or what? I'm not really sure, but, when it comes down to it, I know where I stand on the issues, and I know that I value conservative principles, and I know that I embrace the Republican Party platform. That's why I'm a Republican. But it didn't take me till I was 68 to learn it. Right. And of course, there's something to be said for some folk to go out there and as a protest, register as nonpartisan, undeclared. I mean, I understand that. I mean, there's some real frustration about the party. I get that. But certainly Mr. Coffey was not of that fold. I mean, in fact, at one point he was a Democrat, right? Oh, yeah, up until the late 90s. And, and I say the same thing. The one thing I notice when I go door to door, I meet a lot of undeclared and nonpartisans or independents or even libertarians that were at one time Republicans, and they changed because they're so sick and tired of the establishment Republican Party. And I feel their pain. I look at it this way. I am going to stick with it because I truly believe we can make change from within. But we have got to make change, and you have got to stand on your principles and your values and put forward legislation and lead in a way that reflects limited government. It reflects conservative values. And I think that's what people want. That's what drove many from the Republican Party. But if we can stick to those principles, I think we can bring them back. Right, and there are a lot of people that are watching your race right now to see whether or not there is a chance where the people's candidate can win, where we can have an impact, where we can actually test these time-tested principles yet again and see how they work in Alaska. I mean, Alaska's had kind of a different approach over time. Yes, a fairly conservative state by some measures, some metrics, but it seems like the establishment keeps winning, and part of it's a reflection of the way business has been done in the state. I mean, this is a state that really has prevailed out of crony capitalism. I'm talking about from a monetary sense. The people saw it, but the leadership has chosen the easier route. And now we're at a point now in our history where
the money's getting cut off. It's not just the federal funding that's limited, but as well now the monetary benefit of oil because of the price falling. So it's an opportunity for the people to take back the process. And I think a lot of people are looking at your candidacy as basically an indicator as to whether or not this can be done. So I'm excited about the result next week. Tell us exactly how this goes down. I mean, what's the number that you got to hit so that there's not a runoff? What happens if there is a runoff? What is the type of result that we would see in the event that we're going to have a second election?
Sure. Well, what we need to do in order to avoid a runoff is get 45% plus one. If anyone achieves that, then there's no runoff. However, if there is a runoff, it'll be the top two vote getters will face off the first Tuesday in May. So there will be 1 month of intensive campaigning. It's looking very, very good. But, you always want to run like you're behind, and you want to run like it's a tight race. And so that's why it really is crucial. If Maria is still listening, we need you to vote. We have got to get every single person and bring 10 of your friends and make sure that they vote, because we do have an opportunity. And in the city of Anchorage, this is so crucial because we currently have a liberal assembly. Government with checks and balances can function far better than one-party rule, especially when that one party is very liberal, because we saw what happened under Begich, and it cost the taxpayers a lot of money.
And 45% of the ultimate turnout, which could be as low as 25%, that's not a lot of votes. So every vote that's out there, it really does count. People need to get engaged in this race. It's an opportunity where you can elect somebody that's going to stand for your values. I mean, Amy's out there on these issues. I mean, she's taken a stand on a bridge. We'll talk more about those here in just a few minutes. Stay with us, The Joe Miller Show. Welcome back to KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM, The Joe Miller Show. We have with us on the air mayoral candidate Amy Demboski, running for mayor of the municipality of Anchorage, talking about the state of the race. Amy, thank you for staying with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
So we were talking about just before the break, kind of the breakdown of the vote. And you said that in order to avoid the runoff, you've got to have at least 45%. The average turnout for these races, 30 to 35%. So if you do the math, I mean, this race could be determined by about 12 or 13% of the registered voters in the municipality of Anchorage, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And when you consider probably only half the population is even registered to vote. I mean, you may be talking about of the adult qualified voting age people in the municipality of Anchorage, this vote could be determined by 6%. I mean, it's just an amazingly small number, right?
It really is. And that's why if conservatives actually get out and vote, if they actually get out and vote and recognize, the way the city of Anchorage goes is typically the way the rest of the state goes. And we saw what happened when Mark Begich got in. We cannot afford another liberal mayor because these people they have their eye on another office. I can already see the tea leaves, and that's why it was so important for a real conservative to step up and run, because we have to make a stand right here.
And importantly, Amy, I mean, it's also an issue of, the time-tested ideals, conservative ideals, fiscal conservatism, they work. And now is the time, especially, where they have to be applied in Anchorage and the state as a whole. And so if we don't have that opportunity, obviously the downside is you get a big spender in like Halcrow or Berkowitz in office, and they're just going to continue to drag us down. But this is an opportunity to show that, the conservative approach to spending into government is something that can address the type of circumstances that we're in now and in a successful way. So it's a real opportunity.
It really does work, and that's why I've been telling people we are at a crossroads right now. We can either choose the calm, steady, disciplined hand, or we can have the borrow and spend model. And frankly, we can't afford the borrow and spend model. We have got to have strong fiscal policy. We have to have someone who's willing to prioritize, and you have to have someone who's willing to say no.
Wanted to talk a little bit about Dan Coffey. We spent most of our time hitting the liberals in the race, Ethan and Ethan Berkowitz and Andrew Halcrow. And again, without question, Andrew Halcrow, he may wear the Republican label. The guy's as liberal as they come, and I think more dangerous than Berkowitz, to be honest with you. But with respect to Dan Coffey, I guess he's taken quite a hit recently over the re-airing of that butt dial that he made, where he basically asserted that he's making payment for votes. Do you think that's hurt him?
I do. I do think it has. I think he sent the media a letter threatening them that or his attorney did, that if they would air it, they would be sued. And I think, unfortunately for him, it reminded people of, his past issues. And I think they're significant. And I got in the race because I made it very clear. I think integrity and ethics matter. I think you need someone in office who has a steady hand, who will be honest and do exactly what they say they're going to do. And I'm not interested in any sort of backroom deals or, paying people for votes. And I know, I've gotten a little bit of slack, because I've said that. But the fact of the matter is, when you say you're doling it out $2.50 a crack and you don't vote right, you don't get your other $2.50. I don't know how else to interpret that.
Well, not only that, I mean, it's set in an environment. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge around this state that we've had a problem with bribery, right? I mean, we had a number of legislators convicted of felony federal charges for taking bribes. And the evidence that came out in the context of our legislature being bribed was that there's a lot more money than that getting passed around. So this is an environment where that type of thing happens. And so what's Coffey going to expect people to take this as anything other than a bribe? I mean, to me, it's just an awful statement to make, a dangerous statement to make, even if it were a joke, and it certainly reflects a lack of judgment, even if it were a joke, as opposed to the real deal. I mean, I just can't imagine somebody hearing that tape, or even hearing about it, reading the transcript on a site, and coming to any conclusion other than the fact this guy doesn't have it to be mayor.
Well, I certainly don't think it's anything funny. I don't think it's a joke at all. And I think, especially when you're the sitting chairman of the assembly and you're talking like that, I think it's inappropriate. And I wasn't about to sit back and let him perceive himself as a conservative and run unopposed. That wasn't going to happen. I knew there had to be a conservative in this race. And
now this guy, he also faced an APOC fine at a time that he was lobbying and apparently was not properly licensed or registered. Is that right?
Yeah, and that was just a couple years ago. So he wasn't registered as a lobbyist, and he was fined for lobbying. So, it's not one thing. There is a pattern of behavior here. And I think that, honestly, I don't think he could survive a general election at all. And I know from my perspective, when I decided to get in the race, I got in the race because there was no one in the race that I would vote for. And I knew if I felt that way, a lot of other conservatives would feel that way too.
Yeah, without a doubt. And my perspective of how this thing is shaping up, I mean, you got the two guys on the left, Andrew Halcrow masquerading as Republican, Ethan Berkowitz as a leftist as they come, but either one of those guys would eat him for lunch. I mean, they'd just play that tape over and over and over again. And if anybody thinks that tape isn't going to get played, all they have to do is look at what our Supreme Court and our courts have said about the public's right to know. It's got to be broader than any other state in the nation for that matter. And I think that, there was just a bunch of blustering on the part of Coffey, and it was a setup for his defeat in the general election had he made it that far. So kudos to you for getting engaged, and I really appreciate you taking that stand. Again, Prop 5, an important issue. I mean, you're the only pro-family candidate out there that's taken an unabridged stand on it. I'm very proud of you on that, and I think it's one of the things that's very important to us that are very concerned about the First Amendment. This issue of political correctness run amok, where now municipalities and states are being used to basically persecute those that have a view that their Christianity or their free exercise is important to them. It's atrocious. And a lot of times it takes a strong mayoral candidate, members of the assembly, to stand up to basically the culture Nazis that are out there trying to impress their views on others, trying to force others to do what they want with respect to family. So I applaud you on that, and I think you ought to continue to make that a key point of your candidacy. It's something that conservatives are going to rally around and I think vote for you on here this next Tuesday.
Well, and I think what's exciting is to have a conservative candidate step forward and say, yes, I'm conservative. Yes, these are my values. And no, I'm not ashamed of it. I believe in conservative values, and that's my bedrock. I mean, that's who I am. And I think people are tired of all this political correct culture where you have to go along to get along. It's time that we stand on principle, and it's time that we're honest and we serve people. And I think that's why I'm here. I mean, I'm sure that our message of limited government, responsible spending, responsible use of taxpayers' dollars, I think those are all good messages, and I think they will resonate with people.
Well, again, I applaud you for what you're doing. How can people get involved? We have just about a minute left.
Sure. The best way is contact us at Amy for Anchorage, and you can do that on Facebook at Amy for Anchorage, or you can go to our website, amyforanchorage.com, and contact us through there. We're going to do a lot of sign waving. We have all kinds of events that are going to be planned. So just get in touch with us through the computer, and that's the best way to do it. And
where is your headquarters? What's its physical address?
Yeah, 329 East 5th Avenue, or they can dial 277-4AMY. That's 4AMY.
Amy Demboski, the only conservative running for mayor, municipality of Anchorage. I appreciate you being on the show. Thank you for answering the tough questions, taking the call, and wish you the best in what you're doing. We'll keep a close eye on what's going on Tuesday. Thank you again.
Well, thanks so much, Joe.
So we've got other great guests coming on later this week. Stay with us. We'll talk more about the mayoral race, I'm sure, as things develop. The Joe Miller Show, daily, 2 to 4 p.m. Thanks for staying with us. Be back with you next